This story begins with a fight between two girls. One of them got so angry that she hit the dark-haired girl. The girl who collapsed on the bookshelf asked, "Is it really that hard to help her?" The girl with the pink hair asked what needed to be added to that day's manual. Is there no way she could do it for her? The dark-haired one apologized and said she just hadn't had time to finish her text yet. Then the girl got even more angry. She kicked the bookcase and shouted that it was her job to write the text for her. She screamed even more, asking, "Is she wrong? The girl is obligated to write her paper." The girl also said that she was a guest writer after all. A ghostwriter is a freelance writer who writes text for another person. Usually such writers are called ghostwriters because they create a product but do not have any copyright on them. The girl with different hair got angry and said that she now understood everything. The girl had forgotten something, and who had spread her writing was the one who had done it. Then the girls went to the computer and the writer showed her finished result. The story is called A Fairy Kingdom for Girls. The main character is Lily Crisper. Lily is the second princess of the kingdom who faces many adversities. There's also a villain named Violet Crisper. You need to charm together with the main character of the beautiful prince, with your character and magic in the new dating simulator. The girl, when she read this, told Kotori, the girl who created the story, that this should definitely be sent to a contest. Kotori herself said it's possible, but it's just her hobby, so it's no big deal. Well then, the girl told her to rely on her. She would arrange and prepare everything, for she was a master at it. But then she thought about it, and said that the title Fairy Kingdom for Maidens should be shortened somehow. Then the girl thought for a bit and said we could just call it the Fairy Kingdom. That would be a great name, easy to remember and sounds good. Kotori agreed with her. And then the girl said that she could consider that this was now her dream. And after that, the girl presented this work in front of the jury. Her name is Yuri Shijima. The girl said that her scripts were well appreciated by the management. She even said it was her original script. Everyone congratulated her and said it was a great job. Remembering all this, Yuria said, "Has the girl forgotten that it was only through her efforts that he was accepted by the management?" Kotori, in a subdued voice and lowering her head, told Tanya to talk nonsense. She'd just given them her text, after all. Yuri turned your back on the girl. Said it was her own fault, she missed her chance. Afterward, she said she wasn't such a bad girl. I just accidentally forgot to put her name on the paper, that's all. However, Yuria also added that as an apology, she after all allowed her to participate in the production of the game. She also said that she was just helping her after all. After all, Kotori was bad at communicating with people, so she took it upon herself to work with the public and the management. Yuria said they made a great team after all, and it went even better than it could have. Kotori was about to object, but the girl interrupted her and said there was no buts, then slapped her hand on the rack and screamed, saying she was working as her guest writer. Let her shut up and just do her job. Of course, Kotori is frantic to return, but can't even get a word out of himself. Fairy Kingdom is her job. The girl doesn't realize how much more she can tolerate. Why she always loses her courage when she interacts with someone. The girl wanted to create a game that people would enjoy. This is her treasure in which she put all of herself. Kotori thought that if she just argued with her, it wouldn't accomplish anything. The release date has been postponed, and fans who have been waiting for so long will not see the sequel. So after thinking it over, the girl started to get up from the floor and said, "Okay." But at that moment the girl began to lean on a table that stood nearby. It was very rickety, and accidentally its leg broke. Kotori didn't expect this. She fell over because of it, and suddenly darkness appeared in front of her eyes. She couldn't see or hear anything. When the girl thought about it and realized that she must have died, Kotori couldn't believe she'd die halfway through. Her life was just awful. Then she thought that if she did manage to be reborn in a world without such people, she would be different. She promised that to herself. And then, a moment later, Kotori opened her eyes and saw a bright sunny day before her. She was sitting in a gazebo next to some people. They had many different mouth-watering desserts on the table, and hot and fragrant tea was prepared. Next to the pergola they took beautiful roses that smelled all over the property. The girl, who was beautifully dressed, turned to her and asked her why she was not answering. Was the crow counting? This stranger called her Violetta. The man sitting next to her was quite tall and well-built. Then the stranger asked what Violetta was thinking about. The stranger asked what Violetta was thinking about, and the man supported her and laughed, saying that it was probably about what she would wear to the ball tomorrow. Kotori recognizes the two men. The man is King Crisper and the woman is the queen. And when she was called Violetta again, the girl jumped up from the table and asked if she really was. The queen was surprised at this reaction of the girl and said that she was somehow strange. Her husband agreed and said that it was really true. Kotori realized that she had transmigrated into the body of the first princess of the Crisper kingdom. The girl looked around and saw familiar estates. She realized that she had been reborn in a fairy tale kingdom, and in Violetta's body as well. This upset her, as Violetta is the biggest villain of the story. By far the most suitable character for reincarnation in the game was the protagonist Lily. She is also Violetta's younger sister. And at that moment, Leela walked up to them. Kotori looked at the girl and thought that she had the aura of the protagonist. She is simply amazing, and the girl herself has been working on her design for a very long time, because the main character, as it is. When Kotori talked to the artist who drew her, she thanked him. Because thanks to him too, the best main character was born. And at that moment, Yuria came to them and said that they had done a great job. Leela is very nice. You can see that she was designed with a lot of love. And she added that it meant they got a muffin for doing a good job. She then held out the wrapped dessert to them. The artist was at once delighted at this reward, and Kotori, looking at her muffin, saw a dead fly there. The girl was immediately frightened and quickly threw it into the trash can, screaming in fear. Everyone in that room immediately marveled that she had picked up a muffin and threw it away just like that. Kotori wanted to explain to the girls that there was nothing wrong there, just a fly. Kotori wanted to explain to the girls that it was nothing, just a fly. Afterwards, the girl said she didn't know she disliked muffins so much and started apologizing. Yuria also said that she knows how hard the girl tries, trying with what she came up with, but she still managed to upset her. At the end, she added that Yuria is such a bad girl. Kotori, who is now in Violetta's body, remembered this particular incident with the fly for some reason. And speaking of which, after him, all the staff who worked on the game disliked it. And at that moment, the girl realized that she would no longer be able to continue making the Fairy Kingdom. In fact, she was shocked when she found out her name wasn't on the screenplay's authorship, but was glad she could at least influence the play from behind the scenes. And now the girl realized that she could no longer work on her. But then she suddenly thought that this was the best possible scenario. The girl is caught in a world where magic exists. The kind protagonist Lily. There are also handsome princes around. Kotori will be able to experience this world in Violetta's body. However, initially this girl has a very nasty character. So she was the only one in the family who couldn't use magic. Violetta felt inferior because Lily could use magic easily. And because of that, she did a lot of terrible things. But since Kotori is the developer of this game, she knows the story very well. And if the girl behaves like Violetta, the story will not end in a good way. But if she does the right thing, she'll enjoy this life. Then the queen still sat looking at her daughter and said that Violetta was some kind of special sweetheart that day. The king backed her up and said that it was indeed true. He had noticed it too. Afterwards, he asked what had happened. Violetta answered that it was nothing. At that moment, Lily approached the girl and told her that she had found a flower that she thought would suit her sister very well. Then Violetta took the gift and thanked Lily for it. But when she looked at the flower itself, she saw a beetle with many eyes. The girl was very frightened, so she dropped that flower and screamed loudly. Kotori then thought about what had just happened, turned to her parents and apologized for her behavior. The king and queen sat with very frightened faces, and when Violetta was about to explain what had happened, Lily ran to her and hugged her tightly. Her sister spoke quickly and said that she didn't know she disliked Rose so much. Lily said it was all her fault. After that, she asked that Violetta not get too angry. Then she smiled evilly and said that she was just a bad girl. Violetta was shocked by what she heard. She couldn't believe that Lily was doing the same thing that Yuria did in real life. And then, looking at the expression on the girl's face, she realized that it was definitely Lily's face. That wicked smile didn't fit this sweet girl. But at that moment, their conversation was interrupted by a man's voice. A boy came to the gazebo and greeted Lady Lily and Violetta. When Violetta looked at the new guest, she recognized it immediately. It was Prince Lance. He is Lily's fiancé and the first prince of the Kingdom of Fire. His full name is Lance de Rosenval. And when Lilia turned and looked at the guy, she immediately asked what was wrong, but Lance answered in a strange way. He started walking up to the girls and said that as soon as it was finished, he ran to her to show her. And so, as the boy approached the girls, he took out a small box. And when he opened it, inside was a beautiful ring with a bright red stone. Lilia was very surprised at this, but the ring was really very beautiful. Then the boy explained that it was a ring of flame. The girl was surprised and asked, "Is that really what he is giving her?" Lance got down on one knee and said that she was made to protect her master. The ring is enhanced with fire magic that will protect her if she is suddenly in danger. He also added that this way he could protect her even when he wasn't around. Lily put the ring on her finger and thanked him for it. Violetta, who had been watching all this in silence, began to recall the events. They were in the courtyard of the castle, and it was the season of blooming roses. Lance gave the girl a flame ring, all the conditions for the event fulfilled. Kotori immediately realized that it could mean only one thing, so the girl shouted for them to be careful. But at that time, everything around them became very dark, and a huge dragon with bright purple eyes sat on their gazebo. Kotori realized that this was the time he had come. The black dragon. The animal looked inside the gazebo, where the people were, with its bloodthirsty gaze. Lance at that moment immediately grabbed his sword that was hanging on his belt. He turned to the dragon and said that he didn't know why he was here, but this was his fiancé's castle, and he would not allow the dragon to rampage on the grounds. After saying those words, the guy drew his sword, which was engulfed in magical fire. But at that moment, the dragon whispered, telling him to give him the ring of flame. At that moment, Violetta noticed a panel pop up in front of Lilia with suggested phrases for a response. There were 3 options there. The first was just fine. The second was no. It's an item dear to me. I won't give it away. And the third was the question, why does he need it? Violetta didn't even have time to say anything. Lilia immediately chose the answer option. No, it's something dear to me. And she wouldn't give it back. Violetta, hearing this phrase, immediately cried out that this answer option, but she did not have time to finish the sentence, because the dragon immediately got angry, used its magic abilities, and exhaled some purple-black smoke from its mouth. The queen and generally everyone present began to cough violently and cover their mouths with their hands. The girl asked, "Is it really poison?" The king then turned to Lance and wanted to say something to him, but the lad interrupted him at once by waving his hand. He told his majesty to leave it to him. He could deal with this dragon himself. And at that very second, he drew his sword again, which burned brightly with flames. The dragon continued to fly around them. At this moment, the king realized that the guy had gotten rid of the poison with the purifying flame, and everyone was actually breathing much easier. Violetta realized that if she did nothing else, it would be very bad. So she went straight to the dragon. The girl stepped out of the flames that kept out the poison, and she immediately found it hard to breathe. But she must do it, because Kotori realized that he was hurting too, after all. She approached the dragon and began to beg for it to calm down, and then she called it Prince Magus. The dragon was very surprised. He started hissing, asking how on earth she knew his name. Violetta says she understands why he wants the flame ring, but she asks that he not kill them, and the girl will help him. But the dragon was surprised and asked how such a young girl could help him. And at that moment, Violetta cried out to Lilia, asking her to give up the ring. The girl was very surprised. She grabbed the ring immediately, covering it with her hand, and asked why she needed it. But Violetta walked up to her sister, grabbed her arm, and shouted for her to give it back faster. After that, the girl took the ring off her hand. Lele immediately started to ask her not to do that, but it was too late. Violetta turned back to the dragon again, coughing heavily, but she reached out to where the ring was, and at that very second, the ring began to fly up in the air and emit a bright yellow light. The girl immediately began to breathe easier. At this point, Lily began to observe all of this, and noticed that this light was coming from the thorns of the roses. It was indeed so. With the help of the ring, Violetta approached the rose bush, and when she pulled the thorns apart with her hands, she saw a small flower there. The girl was very happy because she had succeeded. Then she took the flower in her hands and immediately put it in her mouth. After that, she started to glow, but quickly approached the dragon, who was already gradually starting to calm down. After that, Violetta kissed the dragon on the lips, and then magic happened. A bright light appeared. And after that, in just a second, instead of a huge and vicious dragon, there was a beautiful guy with black hair. This is the first prince of the kingdom of Night. His name is Magus von Nightwald. Violetta immediately said with relief that it was very good that he had regained his former appearance. Then the king came to them and said, "Who would have thought it?" Violetta had lifted the curse on Prince Magus himself. The queen, who was standing next to him in a surprised voice, said that it turns out the rumors about him being cursed and becoming a dragon were true after all. Violetta said that in order to break the curse too, a ring of flame was needed, as well as a rose that bloomed only in this garden. The girl said that she had to help him by all means. Lily was shocked. She was still impressed, and now she realized what that ring was for after all. The girl felt very ashamed. Tears came to her eyes, and she said that it was just an expensive gift from Lance. She apologized because everyone was in danger because of her stubbornness. The girl couldn't hold back her tears. Lance hugged her and began to comfort her, telling her not to blame herself. Violetta, watching all this, thought that Yuria was acting as usual after all, playing to the public. But at that moment, Magus looked at the girl suspiciously and asked how she even knew about his curse. The girl didn't expect such a question and asked him what he meant. The boy came closer to her and said that no one but him was supposed to know how to break the curse. At that moment, Kotori thought that it was no surprise. After all, she was the one who wrote the plot, but it wouldn't be very good to say so after all. But then the guy said she was some kind of mystery and called her a princess. And at that moment a sign popped up in front of the girl that the 5th level of Magus's favor had been reached. The girl was surprised, but after looking at him, she thought that he was just very handsome. However, it was certainly obvious, since he was the second most popular character after Lily. They also stayed up several nights while working on it. The developers redesigned it many times until they were completely satisfied. And at that moment, Lily came closer to them. She turned to Prince Magus and said that she was very pleased to meet him. The girl formally introduced herself, but said he could just call her by her first name. Magus smiled back at her and said he was pleased too, calling her Princess Lily. Then the girl made a very pitiful face and apologized for what had happened. Lily said that she just didn't know anything. But the guy, turning away from her and continuing to look at Violetta, told her to just forget about it. Lily smiled, pretending it was no big deal. But she squeezed her own hand so hard with her anger that it started to shake. Lily was in her bedroom after a while, and she was so unhappy about something that she was screaming all over the place. The girl asked the maid what she was even doing, let her carry the next dress. Lily's personal maid's name was Yumina. Her mistress threw another dress at her. Then the girl, almost falling over, said that of course she was already running. But the maid was in such a hurry that she did not even notice that her skirt had fallen a little, and she stepped on it with her foot. This caused the girl to fall to the floor, also dropping her dress along with her. Yumina immediately began to apologize. She said there was nothing wrong with the dress, so it wasn't a big deal. But Lily gave her such an arrogant look that it gave the maid the creeps. And when Yumina was about to add something, the mistress took a glass of water that was standing nearby and poured it right on her head. Afterwards, I apologized to her in a playfully pathetic tone, saying that her hand had just slipped. Then she added that it was easy to catch a cold like that. She asked Yumina to hurry up and dry off somewhere, like going back to her poor village right now. At this very time, Violetta was strolling about the estate, and the maid was following her, holding one of her outfits. It was her personal maid, a girl named Rana. She asked Mistress Violetta to change her clothes, for she had to go to the ball. But Violetta objected at once and said that this dress was enough for her. The girl was wearing a beautiful but a little modest red dress. And this request came because on this day there was a ball in honor of the main character, Lily. She'll be asked to dance by all the characters you can choose from. It will also determine from the storyline which character Lilia will choose after all, and Violetta will end up with nothing. However, Kotori has no intention of going the way of the villainess. She just decided to exist in peace. At that moment she saw a maid come out of Lily's room who was all wet and in tears. The girl immediately asked her what was wrong, why she was so wet. Then Yumina said in a trembling voice that Lady Lily had kicked her out. Violetta was shocked. She didn't understand why the girl had done that. After all, in the story, Lily is a kind princess who is capable of compassion like no other. That's exactly how Kotori envisioned her. At that moment, the maid began to leave. She apologized to Violetta for having to see her like that. But Violetta immediately stopped her, grabbed her arm and hugged the girl. Yumina was shocked by this action. She asked Miss Violetta what she was doing, but the girl, still hugging the maid, said that she would be her maid from that day forward. No excuses, only who drove her to such a state. And at that moment the girl herself wondered how it was that Yuria, in the guise of her beloved Lilia, could do such a thing at all. After that, they came to Violetta's room, and Rana helped her get ready for the ball. The maid said she had to change her clothes immediately. While helping her buckle her corset, the maid also told her to behave like a true lady. After that, Yumina came in. She turned to Mrs. Violetta and said that because she was all wet, the girl would now be late for the ball. She apologized for wetting her dress when she hugged her. But Violetta smiled and said she didn't have to apologize because everything was fine. She also said that she was going to change the dress anyway. But Violetta told the maid not to let it go to her head. Yumina thanked her and said she would bring the hairpin for her. The other maid told her to take the earrings as well. The girls started their work to prepare the mistress for the ball, and while they were doing their duties, they even hummed some tune. That's when Yumina couldn't stand it and told her partner that there were rumors about Mistress Violetta, that she is an arrogant and very cruel girl. Also heard that she treats her servants terribly. Rana agreed with her, but said that it had been like that until recently. The mistress had fired a lot of maids, and even she was getting a lot of flack. But the girl said that it was as if she had just recently become a completely different person, and the kind of Mrs. Violetta she wanted to serve forever. Rana then began brushing Violetta's beautiful hair for a further hairstyle, and at that moment, Kotori remembered the situation she described when Yumina was carrying the crystal flower and accidentally broke it. The girl was very frightened about this. She immediately told Lila that she had broken the crystal flower that brings good luck. But the girl carefully asked if she had hurt herself. The maid replied that she was fine, but the jewelry was broken. Lilia interrupted her and said that if she was fine, she was fine. Have her take a look at them. The girls looked at the crystal shards, and the lady said that the sunlight reflected in the shards, in all the colors of the rainbow. It was very beautiful. Lilia laughed and said they were very lucky to witness such a beautiful sight. That was the real Lilia right there. She was a very kind and caring girl that Kotori was developing this game, putting her whole heart and soul into it. It was her treasure. No, it was just her life. The girl was starting to get angry at the unfairness of life, but she's determined that she won't let her precious world be destroyed. She must stop Yuria at all costs, and no matter what it takes. And so, at last, the ball began. The king spoke his marvelous speech. He addressed all the guests and said that on this day, a miracle had happened that brought them closer to their neighbors. The curse on the prince of the kingdom of night, Majes, was lifted. Everyone immediately began to applaud, happy to hear such news. He also said that the girl who broke the curse was the princess of their kingdom. And so, when the king was about to call her name, a girl in a beautiful and lush dress entered the banquet hall. It was Violetta, who was a little late. When she came in to see them, she apologized for not being on time. She then turned to the guests and said hello to them. Violetta was just incredibly beautiful in that dress, and with those precious jewelry that emphasized her eye expression. All the ladies and gentlemen present were shocked when they saw her because the girl really looked incredible. Then the king coughed to draw attention to himself and said that the one who broke the curse was his dear daughter Violetta. And now the problem of finding an heir to the throne of the kingdom of night has been solved after all. Violetta stood right in front of her father, and then the king asked her what she wanted as a reward for such a fine deed. He asked if it might be her favorite jewel, or if it might be her favorite land, but Violetta objected to him. And she said that she didn't need anything, just a simple thank you would suffice, and the fact that she had managed to break the curse after all was just a coincidence. At this point, Lily, who had been sitting next to her and listening all this time, gloated, thinking to let her know her place, and mentally called her a useless ghostwriter. Soon the party began, and all the guests were talking among themselves and having fun, enjoying such a beautiful evening. Some just stood on the sidelines, while others danced, mesmerized by the music. Many people were whispering, asking each other if Princess Violetta had really broken this curse. Of course, people didn't believe it. They thought it was another trick. Or maybe she was up to something bad again. Violetta, who was standing near the window and heard all this talk, thought that it was basically expected, and she even felt funny about the situation. Violetta, the villain princess. Everyone knows about her nasty temper, so it's no wonder everyone thinks she's up to something bad. At that moment, a maid who was holding a tray of drinks began to walk past her, and Kotori immediately remembered that Violetta had made a great deal of trouble. Just then she poisoned the king's glass and then blamed Lily, saying she saw the girl add the poison to it. She planned for Lily to be imprisoned for poisoning the king. Violetta longed intensely to see her sister weeping in despair, a prisoner in jail. At that moment, Kotori thought that she had created her like that. Such a badass. There are, of course, so many offshoots to different endings. There's no need to weed anyone out. All the more the girl does not want the face of such a kind king to be distorted by the grimace of pain he will experience when he drinks the poison. She certainly doesn't want to see that. Kotori thought that if she didn't do anything, the king wouldn't be poisoned, and everything would be fine. At that moment, Lily approached the maid, and taking the tray from her, said that her sister was the center of attention today, but she couldn't keep up with her. The girl then turned to her father and said that she had prepared a drink for him. She also added that this drink is alcohol that her sister advised her. It would definitely be delicious. With these words, the girl looked at Violetta with a very angry look and a smile that did not bode well. Kotori couldn't believe that she was trying to get her own father drunk on poison. She decided that she had to stop the girl immediately, so Violetta immediately rushed out of her seat, running to her sister and shouting her name. But Lily, of course, pretended not to be heard and continued up to the king. Violetta realized that there were too many people, and she simply wouldn't make it in time. Violetta was still trying to sneak through the dancing couples and thought to herself, so she wouldn't do that because the main character shouldn't do that. And of course, as the villain, all the blame will be dumped on her. And if Violetta is accused of poisoning, then this main story of the fairy kingdom will make the kingdom far from fairy. And so when Violetta saw her sister begin to pour the drink for the king, she flew even faster. But unfortunately her shoes were too high-heeled and she tripped. The girl could not keep herself on her feet and started to fall. But at that moment she was picked up by strong arms and did not let her fall. Then Violetta looked at her savior. It was the Prince of Magus. He looked at the girl and asked where she was running so fast. The girl was very surprised to see him, but she was not confused, grabbed his clothes and told him to help her. Violetta had a very worried voice, and she said that to her father. But the girl didn't even have time to finish. The guy immediately said that he understood everything. Then he put his arm around her waist and began to dance. The prince realized that if she wanted to go through such a stream of people, it was better to merge with them. And just like that, a guy and a girl were dancing. They looked very beautiful and cute, and their movements were smooth and professional. At that moment, Lily had already poured a drink into a glass and handed it to her father. The king immediately thanked his daughter. But when the king was about to drink, Violetta came up to them with the prince. She turned to her father and said that she had been dancing and was very tired. She asked her father if he could give her one sip from the goblet Lily had brought him. She thought it was the perfect drink to quench her thirst. The king was surprised and asked if she really wanted it. When the girl nodded, he handed her a goblet and said that of course she could drink. Lily, who was watching this, thought that Violetta wouldn't drink it since there was poison in it and she knew about it. But how surprised she was when she saw her sister start to drink from the glass. She was even frightened and thought, does she really mean it? When Violetta finished drinking, she turned to her father and said that, as expected, the alcohol tasted even better from his cup. She then thanked him for letting her quench her thirst. The girl said she would go, but thought she should leave as soon as possible before the poison took effect. So she turned to Prince Magus and asked if he could escort her to the fresh air. When the boy looked at Violetta, he saw that she was sweating profusely. Yes, and her eyes were starting to get bloodshot, as if they were bloodshot. He thought, was there poison in that cup? Violetta could stand it no longer. She said she had to hurry up and asked him to hurry up. Saying the last phrase, her legs became much heavier. She could no longer hold herself up. So the girl fell to the floor and lost consciousness. Everyone was shocked. They were immediately frightened and started shouting her name. The king and queen didn't even know what to do. They just stood there looking at the girl in horror. Lily, watching this whole spectacle, was getting very nervous. She thought, how on earth did Violetta take it and drink it, knowing it was poison? Lily thought it was just plain disgusting after all. That old man must have drank the poison. And the girl, you were going to blame Violetta specifically for the poisoning, and then you'd cure her father with healing magic, but the girl ended up messing it up. The girl thought, did that idiot really never realized anything? Or is she trying to outplay her? This is just ridiculous to her. At that moment, Lily ran up to her sister and began to ask in a concerned voice what had happened. Then she turned to the hall, which was filled with guests, and asked that someone get the doctor. Marge watched all this incredulously. It was still a mystery what was going on. And at that moment, Lilia actually took the evidence, namely the goblet that the girl had drunk from. And now Violetta won't be able to blame her. It's all useless, the girl thought. She'll still be better than her, even in this game world. She's certainly not going to help her with her magic. And now Yuri will see what happens next. Then the girl left the hall and went somewhere. Lance noticed that. He thought it was better for her not to be alone now. It would be better. At this moment, the king together with Margus still stood over Violetta. The girl's father said that it was urgent to take her to the doctor. Then the boy replied that it was probably poisoned with something, and it was better not to move it at all. And at that moment, there was an immediate whisper from the audience. They were shocked at how a girl could be poisoned from the king's glass. People guessed that it meant that someone was trying to poison the king. Marja was very worried about the girl. At that moment, Yumina, who had run after the doctor immediately after the incident, had already brought him and was hurrying him along, telling him to go faster because it was an emergency. As Marja looked at the girl, he saw that she was getting worse and the doctor might not make it in time. He couldn't stand it any longer and shouted. Guy turned to the king and asked if there was anyone in his family who could use healing magic. The man thought for a moment. And then he said that indeed, the ability to use healing magic had been passed down from generation to generation in their family, and Lily should be next. However, he said that his daughter had not yet awakened that power within herself. At this moment, Yuria, who was in the girl's body, thought that the undoubtedly real Lily would still not be able to use magic at this moment. The conditions of the awakening would be fulfilled a little later when Violetta falls off a cliff and nearly loses her life. So before Kotori entered Violetta's body, she called her to this rock and recreated those events. That's how the girl's power was awakened. Yuria was ready for Violetta to accuse her of pushing her, but apparently, because of the blow to her head, she didn't remember anything. It was just a game after all, so it was no surprise to the girl. Marge could barely contain his emotions because he was so hurt and resentful of Violetta, and the fact that there was nothing he could do about it. However, Yuria was content. She thought it was all wonderful. After all, she was afraid that she would not be able to realize anything in this world. But then suddenly the maid spoke. She apologized for taking so long, but said that Mistress Lily had inherited the healing magic. The king was very surprised. He asked if it was true and his daughter really already had such magic. It was Yumina. She said she saw a girl use it. Lily had somehow healed her scratch. The girl herself, who was standing nearby, hearing all this, was very surprised and wondered who had said all this. But in order to justify herself, the girl immediately said that she was only able to heal scratches. But something so serious was impossible. At this point, Marge interrupted the girl and shouted that it didn't matter at all. Let her try to cure Princess Violetta. He was very worried about the girl. And at that moment, another voice was heard. It was Lance. He started to approach the girl and said that he quite understood that she was worried. When he was around, he put his hand on her shoulder and told her to be brave for her sister, and he would be there for her. And he'd be there for her. At this moment, Yuria was very surprised. She didn't understand why they were all so insistent. Why on earth would she want to treat this ugly girl? But she wasn't allowed to deviate from her role, so she said, "Okay." After that, Lily walked over to Violetta and began to use her magical abilities to heal her. A bright flame of light appeared from her hands, which was filled with life. Then she whispered some kind of incantation, and raising her hands in the air, a bright beam of light flashed across the banquet hall. The doctor, who was sitting next to her, felt Violetta's arm and said that her breathing and pulse had returned to normal. There was no more poison left in her system. The king, hearing all this, thanked Lily and said that she had done well. The girl replied that there was nothing special about it, but joyful shouts were heard from the crowd, which supported the girl. Then Lance walked over to her. Taking her hand, he kissed it gently, and said that here she was his Lily. He never doubted her for a second. After that, he looked at the girl with his amorous gaze because he fell in love with her even more after her act. Then Lily, embarrassed, thanked him for his words and everyone else for their support. At that moment, Yuria herself thought that this was all just disgusting. This was her chance to be the center of attention. She didn't understand how she could have predicted that Violetta would want to drink poison. She also thought of that hillbilly maid. Yuria didn't understand how she dared to open her mouth at all. The girl thought this game was just dumb, and looked at Violetta and decided that if she hadn't realized yet that she shouldn't cross the road like that, she would make her realize this simple truth. Then she looked at her family and the guests that had come, and thought she would put these idiots in their place too. The next morning when Lily woke up, she was very bored. The girl thought that the whole ball had been ruined for her. She sat by the window and stared out there, thinking that it was all because of that idiotic Gaster. She didn't understand why everyone was so worried about her. Yuria thought that she didn't even put a lethal dose in there, but so purely to scare and earn herself a good image. But then one very interesting thing caught her eye. A guy with a good build and black hair came to her window. It was, of course, Marge's. The boy bent down to pick a small flower. Yuria was immediately pleased, and she smiled, thinking that at least seeing her suffer was nice. When she looked closely at the guy, it seemed to her that he was now on Violetta's side, and that was very unusual. But the girl decided that he was still a character that should be hers. But she'll take care of that a little later. Right now she has other things to prioritize. It was some time later that Violetta finally woke up and she was getting better. "Thank you, my maids," she said. She was already fine. But the girls protested and told her to stay in bed. Violetta really just wanted to go for a walk to relieve stress after the ball, and she was getting a little tired of this overprotective behavior. But at that moment someone knocked on her door. The girl immediately rejoiced, because it could cheer her up somehow. Getting up from the bed, she immediately said that they could come in. Then Violetta went to the door and opening it saw Marge in front of her. The maids immediately became agitated and began to shout at the girl to stay in bed. But Violetta was no longer listening to them. She wanted to address her guest, but Marja interrupted her at once and asked her why she had risen at all. Violetta noticed that he was looking at her like she was some kind of idiot. Then the maids immediately ran up and put the girl back to bed. Violetta asked what he wanted, but the boy asked indifferently, wondering if he couldn't just visit her. He held the bouquet of flowers that he had previously held behind his back so the girl wouldn't notice. Marge said he didn't know which ones she liked, but let her have at least these. And at that moment, she noticed that their relationship had begun to improve. Violetta thanked him and thought to herself that she had not even guessed that he would bring flowers for her. Violetta could not believe that he had chosen them for her, nor did she understand why he had come at all. Marja must see Lily at the ball and then come to her every night. And during one of their nighttime walks, an event would happen, and guy and girl would fall in love with each other. At that moment, her musings were interrupted by the voice of Marj. He asked why she had done something so reckless, taken the poison and drank it. Violetta hesitated. She didn't know what to say to him, so she simply said that it had happened. The guy was outraged and asked what she meant by that. Let her show him a princess who would do such a thing in her right mind. Violetta was surprised and asked if he wanted to see her. Then she pointed her finger at herself and said that she was sitting right in front of him. Marge was very much surprised. For a while he just stood looking at the girl, and after that he laughed loudly, as with a good joke. At that moment Violetta looked at him and noticed that the guy had a very childish smile, and she couldn't even hold back a chuckle. Then the Margie, seeing her laughing, was indignant and asked her what made her laugh so much. The girl giggled again and said it was nothing. Then the guy turned the conversation and said that he would like to apologize in advance. Even though she didn't want to bring it up, he still couldn't help but ask. Marja lowered her head and asked, "She wanted to cover Princess Lily, right?" Violetta was surprised, starting to feel a little nervous, but tried to ask in a calm tone what made him think that. The boy explained that the one who had slapped the goblet hard for the king was Lily. Besides, he'd seen the princess wiping it with a curtain. At that time, Lance was walking down the corridor. He heard familiar voices and, going to the door, began to eavesdrop on their conversation. Guy heard Marja say that she would destroy the stings of evidence. He wasn't sure how Violetta would react to that, so he talked about it. But the boy heard nothing further. Lance remembered that she had been doing something strange behind the curtain that night. Whichever way he looks at it, he still comes to the same conclusion, that Lily was trying to poison the king. Then he smacked himself on the head and wondered what was wrong with him, how he could think about it again, even though he chose to believe Lily. He knows better than anyone what kind of person she really is. She'd once asked Lance to help with a kid who'd gotten hurt, and the girl really cared about that. But at that moment he was interrupted by Lily's familiar voice. The girl came up to him and asked him if he had come to see his sister. The boy said yes, when the girl said in a cheerful voice that she was here to do it too. Lance looked at her and decided that this was definitely some kind of mistake. She's worried about her sister and couldn't have put poison on the king. At that moment, Lily peeked behind the door and said that there was already a guest there. It was not good to disturb them, so she suggested waiting and walking in the garden for now. The boy agreed, and thought to himself that even though he wanted to believe Lily, he still couldn't just shake off those awful doubts. So he firmly decided that he had to check everything. Lily walked forward a little and thought for a moment. At that moment she realized that her morning was now completely ruined because of that horrible face. That idiotic virgin had already bothered her in her past life, and now she had met her in the game world as well. After a while, the boy and the girl went out into the garden. There was a beautiful gazebo where they sat down to have a little break in tea. Yuria took her cup of tea and thought for a moment. Because of that idiot Kotori, the two of them had been crushed by cabinets and reborn in the fairy kingdom. But she was still lucky enough to at least move into the body of the main character, Lily. She knows the basic plot of the game and planned to live in this world as a harem. But in the end, her plans were thwarted by the rebirth of the much-hated Kotori. She wanted to never cross paths with her again, but Yuria doesn't know much about which ones come out to the desired ending. Then the girl decides that, as in her previous life, she will simply train the girl to give her what Yuria so desires. The girl reflected that even if Kotori was reborn, she was still herself in the end, and it would show her who was in charge. Also, the main character of this story is exactly Lily. At that moment, the guy reached closer to the girl, and they kissed. After this incident, Lily went out into the city with her maid. Looking around, the girl said that everything around was so peaceful, directly shining with a joyful atmosphere. People were going about their business, some were talking, some were carrying something in their hands. Everyone was minding his own business and not disturbing others. The children not far from the girl were playing a game when something happened, and they laughed so joyfully that it made my ears ring. The maid who was standing next to Lily was trembling with fear, but she had some sort of bag in her hands. Then the girl turned to her and took it. After that, Lily lowered it to the ground, and a snake with red eyes and scales on its body crawled out of the huge bag. It immediately began to hiss. The first thing the snake did was to crawl to the children who were nearby, and immediately attacked them, biting their legs. The poor boy was frightened and started screaming loudly. Then his parents ran up to him. People were fussing and running. Who went where? They said it was a poisonous snake. The parents were concerned, but did not understand where it had come from in the center of the city. Then the man shouted and said to suck out the poison as soon as possible, and the boy's mother told him to call a doctor. At that moment, Lily thought that this was her finest hour. She walked over to the family, took off her hat, and asked them to be quiet. The girl made the most innocent face she could. The people were surprised and asked where it had come from. Then the girl approached the boy, and 2 marks from the snake's teeth showed, from which blood was pouring. Lily immediately stroked his head and told him not to cry. Everything would be okay now and the pain would go away. Then the girl started to activate her powers, and the whole street was filled with bright light again, and Lily whispered some spell to heal the boy's leg. And then, in an instant, the blood had already stopped pouring from the wound, and the small holes began to tighten little by little with new skin. The girl smiled at him and told him that everything was fine now. He could be sure that nothing bad would happen to him. The boy was immediately happy, because he no longer felt pain, and thanked the girl. His mother, who still had tears in her eyes from excitement, was also happy. Lily bowed to them at this moment, and said that in that case, she would be on her way. But a woman's voice reached her. The woman told her to wait, after which she and her husband brought her a basket with various fillings, and told her to take it as a thank you. Lily pretended to be very surprised, but then she smiled at the couple and thanked them, saying it was her pleasure. At this point, people were already thinking of dispersing, but when they saw it, they began to whisper, saying that it was somehow small for a princess. How many people could even give such a small gift to Her Majesty? But the girl smiled and thanked the couple and said she would definitely eat it all. After that, the girl went farther into the forest and immediately threw the 2 baskets into the river. All the food that the villagers had given her began to float downstream. After all this, the girl wiped her hands and turned to the maid, asking if she had written everything down. Then the maid pulled out a picture frame with a picture of the boy's injured leg inserted in it. Lily hesitated and said I answered very quickly, spreading through the baby's body, and it was a very good thing she was there after all. Then she asked where the snake was now. The maid lowered her head and apologized, but said she had missed it. The girl was indignant and asked if she was lying. She told her to catch the snake while she healed the child. Then she sighed and said that there was nothing she could do about it. At that moment, the maid thought that perhaps she had been lucky this time. When Lily saw the look on her face, she moved closer and asked if she was relieved, thinking that since the snake was gone, the poison experiments were over. But after that, the girl pulled out another suitcase with a sack in it, and said it was such a pity. After all, she had had the most successful experience with Sister Violetta. She had learned a lot about healing poison. And after that, Lily asked for the maid's hand. The girl immediately became frightened and started to apologize, because something started to twitch rapidly in that bag. When Lily smiled wickedly and said since it wanted the girl to forgive her, let it give her a hand. She also said that even if the maid suddenly got poisoned, she would not let her die from the poison and would cure her. At the end, she added that she was very kind after all. There was nothing left for the maid to do. So she went over to that suitcase and began with hands trembling with fear to untie the bag, which could have contained anything. When the bag was untied, the girl began to slowly put her hand in it. Tears came to her eyes because she was so scared, and when she did, she was bitten by the snake that was inside. The girl screamed loudly in pain because the snake was poisonous and very strong. The maid began to beg Mistress to allow her to remove her hand. She had sweat and tears streaming down her face. But Lily told her in an innocent voice to remember to breathe. And afterward she asked, "Does it hurt?" And she probably didn't think it would be this unpleasant. At that moment, Yuria thought that the goblet of poison she had brought back then had also failed to prove effective. That poison should have killed Violetta. Perhaps the girl was endowed with some sort of magical protection. Yuria, of course, did not foresee this, and she very much doubts that it will be possible to control her by simply poisoning her. One has to think how else to break the girl. Then she sat under the sound of the maid moaning in pain and wondered, what were the girl's weaknesses? Yuria thought that, sort of. Violetta hadn't been able to use magic since she was born. Yuria needs to figure out how she can use this to her advantage. Well, then she couldn't stand it any longer and yelled at the whole forest that she was annoyed with the whole thing. Basically, only Katori did everything, and she herself can't even remember anything from the story. At this point, the maid couldn't take the pain anymore, so she fell to the ground and a snake crawled out of the bag. The snake crawled closer and closer to the girl, and when it wanted to bite Lily's hand, something unexpected happened. Lily was very frightened because a rock landed next to her hand and the snake hissed loudly, flying off to the side. When the girl looked around, she didn't see anything strange, but at that moment they heard a voice coming from above. It was Violetta. She sat on the flying animal and told her sister that she apologized for scaring her. The girl explained that there was just a poisonous snake in there, otherwise it would have bitten her. Lily said hello to the girl, making a cheerful appearance. And she herself remembered looking at Violetta's jewelry, specifically a ring and earrings with beautiful silver stones. The girl realized that this was how she protected herself with magical artifacts. They could be used not only for defense, but also for offense. If they protected her life from the deadly poison, then Yuria realized they were the very artifacts. At that moment, Violetta had already landed beside her sister. But then, she shifted her gaze to the maid and was horrified at the sight of her, pointing her finger at her. She said that this girl had been bitten by a poisonous snake. We must use healing magic quickly, or something terrible would happen. Lily was left with no choice, so she used her magic. Then the girl just lay there and gained her powers on Earth. Lily said that she would be fine now. At this point, she looked at her sister and asked, where was she flying to at this hour? Violetta didn't feel very comfortable with that question. She looked away, averting her gaze, and said she wasn't going anywhere, just walking. The girl immediately realized that she just didn't know how to lie. And after that, she agreed that it was a good day for a walk, but she still had to be careful. But at that moment, Violetta climbed back on her winged creature and turned to her sister, and said that she would be flying by now. And at that moment, Yuria remembered one very important moment from the story. Namely, that the one who makes magical artifacts for Violetta lives in this very forest. There are actually a lot of different rumors about this forest. One of them is that deep down in the forest there is a lonely house. From this house, the joyous cries of a happy family cannot be heard. The owner of this abandoned and remote house wears a frightening iron mask. He is the one who helps the witch with her plan to take over the world, and also creates magical artifacts for her. Soon Violetta finally reached this house and, stopping in front of the door, thought that taking over the world would be too much. Then she stroked her animal and thought that maybe Violetta really did have such thoughts. She told her flying creature to wait for her outside for a while. With those words, the door opened and the girl immediately saw a man in an iron mask with his eyes closed. He was also wearing a dark blue cloak. He was sitting on one knee and waiting for something. The man said that she shines brighter than the stars, and her touch is more gentle than the spring wind. He also said that he existed only to fulfill her wishes. Then the guy looked at the girl and said, "There is a return." There was something kind, but at the same time frightening in his gaze. His eyes were of different colors. However, that didn't make him ugly. Violetta did not answer anything. She was stunned by this greeting and just stood there, even with her mouth slightly open in surprise. The man felt uncomfortable. He asked Mrs. Violetta if he had not greeted her well enough. Then the girl finally woke up and said that not at all. He just scared her a little. She apologized and told him to wait for a while. The girl turned away from him and thought that although she had thought it up herself, but when one sees it with one's own eyes, the effect is quite different. At that moment, the guy took the magic quill, walking up to the girl. He apologized and felt the remnants of magic in her body. After that, the man said that it was clear to him now. Princess Lilia had used her healing abilities. Violetta turned to him and said that was correct. But the man said that was strange because the prophecies said that the healing magic should awaken in Lily during the season when the savanna flowers bloomed. That guy's name was Shiki. Kotori thought he was basically saying the right thing. The events that should have caused Lily's magic to awaken should have happened much later. But back then, on the maid, she had used perfect healing magic without any problems. The girl realized that the story now went completely differently than in the game, and she's sure it's because of their rebirth in the world of the fairy kingdom. That's when Shiki stopped driving his pen and said that there was no need in the magic trace anymore. And after that, he added that as he had said many times before, when his magic artifacts came into contact with other magic, they could have unexpected effects on her body, so the girl should be careful. Violetta seemed to be thinking about something completely different. And when Shiki noticed it, he said that he would recharge the magic as well as the energy of her ring. The girl simply thanked him. After that, she sat down on a chair nearby, and the foreman began to do his work. He walked over to the workbench, and a bright blue light came from it. They were in silence for a while, but Violetta turned to him and asked if he wanted to take off that mask. Shiki was very surprised. He went over to her, knelt down and said that he must have greeted her wrong. The girl was surprised and asked him why he thought that. The guy said that the mask was the price, and he had to wear that iron on his face or he couldn't concentrate his magical power and create artifacts. If the girl wants him to take it off, then it means she doesn't need him anymore. After saying those words, Shiki became very sad. Violetta then quickly apologized to him, saying that she didn't mean it that way at all. In fact, she understands everything and knows that he is a master craftsman who makes magical artifacts exclusively for Violetta. As a Dasiki, he was a slave with a huge reserve of magical power. Violetta noticed this and imprisoned him in this forest away from everyone, back when he was just a child. The boy has survived repeated and brutal torture. So far, there is nothing left for him in the whole world but Violetta. He is absolutely faithful to her and does not know his life without his mistress. So even to this day, Shiki continues to produce magical artifacts for Violetta. In other words, it could be said that she was the one who had shackled him in that mask. At that moment, the girl looked at him with eyes that were full of regret for her actions. Just as Shiki was about to say something, the door suddenly opened and Lily walked in, addressing her sister. Violetta was surprised. She did not understand why, for this was a place that only she herself knew about. Lily walked further into the room and said that she wanted to walk with her too, so she followed her. Then the girl started to look around and asked what this place even was. Yuria at that moment thought that everything coincided with her expectations. This house really is her personal master of magical artifacts, because there were different jewelry with stones that were imbued with magic everywhere. At this point, Violetta exhaled a sigh of relief, because Lily couldn't have come to the cabin at a time like this. This was not a game event, but in the game, she really could have met Shiki. Then she told him that he would remain himself, even without that iron mask. After that, the girl took it off the guy's face because the main character's love can free Shiki from Violet's curse, and he can get a good ending. But if he doesn't take off the mask, only a bad ending awaits him. Violetta will punish him until at one point she goes overboard with her punishments, and until Shiki eventually dies in excruciating pain. Kotori felt creepy at the thought, but she knew she wouldn't do such a terrible thing. But she wants to unmask him and free him from his slavery. She didn't even realize how she had thought of such a punishment. It was very cruel to roast a man in an iron mask with fire. But at that moment, the girl remembered that it wasn't her who came up with this horrible punishment, it was Yuria. She was always good at coming up with bad endings. But Violetta was interrupted by Lily, who came up to her and asked who the gentleman was. The girl was frightened because her sister had noticed Shiki, Then she looked under the table and saw the guy, wondering who was even hiding like that right now. But she realized that since it was already on, she should go with the story and should show her how to go for a good ending. At that moment, Violetta coughed and asked in surprise if she had not introduced him to her. Then she said his name. Lily tried angrily upon hearing his name. She then walked over and leaned under the table, asking if he was creating magical artifacts for the girl. The girl then turned to the guy and said that she was very pleased to meet Shiki and gave her name, asking if he would show himself to her. At this moment, Kotori thought that Shiki needed to try his best, for this was the way to his good ending and his own freedom, his long and happy future. At this point, Lilia took the guy's hand and started pulling him out from under the table, telling him he didn't need to be shy, let him show her his face. And here the guy did look at her. He had a very sad look on his face because he knew what the reaction would be. Lilia, seeing his iron mask, was very frightened, sharply shouted, "You!" and kicked him even with all her might in the face. She, wiping her hands with a napkin because she had soiled it, asked what kind of mask it was anyway, just gross. Violetta was shocked. Didn't Yuria see his design, she thought? Lilia said that she wouldn't even touch it with her hand. After that, she started to leave and said that she urgently needed to wash herself. Violetta looked around. She didn't realize what had just happened at all. Her sister was gone, and Shiki was lying on the floor unconscious from the blow from Lily. After that, Violetta immediately ran up to the guy and asked if he was in one piece and how he was feeling. The man, fixing his mask, said that she could not worry. The guy also said in a sad voice that he was just an empty place. An empty person. He doesn't care how he is spoken to or treated. His heart no longer feels pain and resentment. Violetta was very angry when she heard this. She clenched her fist because of her anger and told him to stop and not to say that. The girl couldn't take it anymore. She screamed and said that he was Shiki, the man without whom this world cannot exist, and he meant a lot to her especially. At this point, Violetta wondered whether she was talking about him as a game character or not. Violetta walked up to him and put her hand on his heart. Shiki was very surprised and asked what she was doing. At that moment, Kotori thought that she had put her heart and soul into this game. Each character is like a favorite child to her. Well, now that she has become Violetta, they are no longer just a cat, not just some program that was created by hand. They're not soulless blanks, but living characters who have their own destiny and feelings. Violetta started to leave and told Shiki to go with her to the castle. The boy was very surprised. He didn't understand what she was doing, since he had been hiding from people all his life. Even though the story goes very differently, but the awakening of Lily's healing magic must be followed by events that increase affection. Shiki should attend the next ball at the castle. That way Violetta can come out to a happy ending, at least for him, and make sure he never has to suffer the agony and pain he had before ever again. When the man went outside, Violetta immediately received a notification that Shiki's affection had reached the second level. The girl was surprised, because she hadn't even done anything. But she was already making progress, and she was happy about it.